So first trumpet. All right. Now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets made ready to blow them. We didn't talk about this, but there's 7 angels to the 7 churches, remember? But now there's 7 angels here. I don't know what the relationship between the two is. I just want to mention it. It's interesting. But 7 just is everywhere too, right? So now here are 7 angels. In what one way to think about the 7 angels, 7 churches, they could be 7 pastors themselves, the leaders of the churches. But these seem to be truly spirit angels, angels in heaven with God, doing God's work. But remember how in Revelation, what we're going to see is in the beginning, angels are running the show for God, basically. Angels are doing all of God's work, administering God's work to humanity. But by the end of the book, God is going to be administering his work through human beings because Jesus is ascended. And so because Jesus is both human and God, humans are going to rule. So this book is kind of that transition between angels ruling and the saints ruling. So verse 6, now 7 angels had 7 trumpets made ready to blow them. First angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, which fell on the earth. 1/3 of the earth was burned up, 1/3 of the trees burned up, and all the green grass was burnt up. We looked at this last week. Here's some of the stuff we had on it. So hail and fire, we saw over and over again in the Old Testament that when God speaks, you'll see hail and fire. In Psalm 18, you'll see hailstones and coals of fire. This comes about over and over in Ezekiel when God's throne kind of comes down. There's coals of fire that are thrown out on Jerusalem. So we see that a lot. We already saw fire being thrown on the earth earlier in chapter 8 with the 7th seal. And we were talking about how that's kind of like Pentecost. In Pentecost, the fire of the Holy Spirit comes down on the earth. We talked about how hail could be part of that firmament, that vault between heaven and earth. That firmament, remember Genesis 1, it separates the waters above and the waters below. It's the second day of creation. And in the book of Ezekiel, that firmament is called crystal. But other Bible translations will say ice. It might be that word means ice, like a sea of ice. And if that's the case, hail could be kind of like pieces of that ice cracking. Remember, we saw in the sixth seal, the heavens were closed up like a scroll. It's like the firmament is collapsing. And so hail's coming down. That might be like that firmament coming down. It could be. It's the only thought I have of what it could mean, but I really don't know. These are plagues that we saw in Egypt. But the trumpets are going to give us some of these Egyptian plagues, but not in the same order. There's 10 Egyptian plagues, there's 7 trumpets. They're not going to line up in order, but we're going to see some of the same stuff, right? So we know that fire and hail fell on Egypt. So if these things are falling here in this first trumpet, then at least symbolically it means that whatever it's falling on is like a new Egypt. If it's repeating those plagues that happened in Egypt, then I wrote it here. I'm going to argue that what it's falling on is Jerusalem. That Jerusalem is the Babylon, or the what we're told in a couple, chapter 2, that it's mystically Sodom and Egypt. And then it says it's the city where the Lord was crucified. We know Jesus crucified in Jerusalem. So these things are starting to happen right in Jerusalem. And so if some of these Egyptian plagues are happening, then in a sense, Jerusalem's becoming kind of like an Egypt. in a bad sense. It's a bad place, like in Egypt. And if it's like in Egypt, then God's people have to do what? They have to get out of there, right? Right? So God's people came out of Egypt, so the plagues were coming down. Get out of here. Okay. Sodom and Gomorrah. What did Lot do? Get out of here, right? They're coming down. You got to get out of here, right? This happens in the Bible again and again. Plagues come down. So Sodom and Gomorrah is like a little mini Egypt in this sense. Plagues came down. Lot got out. You got to get out. And that happened in Egypt. Now it's happening here. You got a third of the land, a third of trees and green grass. What in the world is that? Short answer, I don't really know. I don't really know, but I have possible suggestions. We saw in the 6th seal, chapter 7. Remember chapter 7, verse 3, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees. Remember that? The corner angels are holding back the winds, and then the other angel who is associated with Jesus is going to seal the saints. And he says, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees till we have sealed the servants of our God upon their foreheads. So do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees. So that's a different list than this, but it's kind of similar. So remember we talked about how land in the book of Revelation and in really the whole Bible, land most of the time is kind of a symbol for the promised land, God's special land to God's special people. And so if a third of the land is burned up, then we can think about that as God's promised land people. So possibly Jews here. And the trees possibly could be saints. We already saw there's saints crying under the altar, and there's more that are the 144,000. There's all these saints who are dying for the faith. Trees are kind of like ladders between earth and heaven. They're symbols of authority. So that's one way of thinking about trees, is that they're the saints. And then the green grass. Day 3 in Genesis 1, God separated the waters below, brought up the dry earth, and then brought about fruit-bearing trees and grass. Green grass would be a source of food. When you see that, you probably think grain. So if a third of the green grass is burned up, we're going to be in a famine situation. By the way, when plagues were coming to Egypt, was there a famine situation? Yeah. And the book of Acts, was Jerusalem in a famine situation? Yes, it was. Chapter 11. So there's a famine situation coming. And last time we were partly getting through the second one. Any questions on the first trumpet? That was just summary. Okay. Second trumpet. I'll read it here. Second trumpet. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. All right. We turn to Matthew 21:21. Matthew 21:21. That's kind of easy to remember, isn't it? And what does he say? Hopefully I got this right. Yeah. All right, Jesus says, truly I say to you, if you have faith and never doubt, you will not only do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, it will be done. And whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith. Matthew 21:21. Notice a couple things there. All right, that mountain is not on fire that Jesus is talking about, but he's talking about a mountain. And how does the mountain move? By prayer. remember chapter 7? There's the corner angels, and they're holding back the wind. They're holding back the four winds of the earth. And then we're told about 144,000. And then the way we look at the 144,000 is they kind of line up with those four horses. Because the center tribe in each of those, of the 12, line up with one of the horses. And then we saw in this video, and we talked about it, that in the Bible, whenever there's a census, in the Old Testament, it's preparing for war. It's preparing for, so in the book of Numbers, God takes a census of those who are 20 and older, isn't it 20? So that he can make sure, okay, this is my military number. They're going to protect the tabernacle. They're going to be a military force. And in Revelation, the church, we are an army, but our weapon is what? Our weapon is prayer. We're a prayer army. And you've probably heard this before, right? The church is a prayer army. We do battle on our knees. We do battle in prayer. And a lot of our hymns will talk about this. But it's actually in the book of Revelation that we kind of really see this on the ground. So Jesus says, you can, if you have enough faith, you pray, you can move a mountain. Here we see one of the trumpets, and one of these mountains is being thrown into the sea. And Jesus is just saying, if you have enough faith to throw a mountain into the sea, pray in my name and it will be done. So prayer has something to do with what's happening in these trumpets. And remember, these trumpets start happening right after Pentecost. Jesus ascends, the Spirit comes down. When the Spirit comes down, people are praying. We saw that in the horses, right? Gospel's going out, people are praying, things are starting to change. So God's weapon is His Word, right? The two-edged sword of His Word. And our weapon is prayer. And I wanted to read this, actually, this little thing I found on prayer. I thought it could be helpful thinking about us as a prayer army. This is a pastor, I think he probably died a couple years ago, but he said this. He said, "There are, I am sure, acres of undiscovered truth about prayer in the Bible." But then he says this about prayer. Prayer is the most unexplored area of the Christian life. Prayer is the most powerful weapon of the Christian life. Prayer is the most hell-feared battle in the Christian life. Prayer is the most secret device of the Christian life. Prayer is the most underestimated power in the Christian life. Prayer is the most untaught truth in the Christian life. Prayer is the most demanding exercise in the Christian life. Prayer is the most neglected responsibility in the Christian life. Prayer is the most conquering outreach. Sounds like battle, right? In the Christian life. Prayer is the most opposed warfare in the Christian life. Prayer is the most far-reaching ministry in the Christian life. So that's just a little food for thought about prayer is a dynamic activity where we're asking God to do war with the forces of evil, right? Paul says our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, against the forces of evil. So here, in this second trumpet, a huge mountain on fire is thrown into the sea. And my suggestion is that this huge mountain, remember we saw in the sixth seal that a lot of people, remember there were 7 groups of people and they were scared about the Lamb coming. They were saying, no, we can't stand when the Lamb comes. So we're going to hide in mountains and in caves. Remember that? And that word for caves is the same word for den when Jesus calls the temple the den of robbers. The Bible will talk about mountains as altars a lot. In Ezekiel, and I can't remember the verse right now, but the altars are mountains of God. But specifically, we see this in the Psalms a lot, the temple will just be called Mount Zion. Mount Zion, right? God is in His holy habitation, Mount Zion. So could it be that Jesus is saying, and it's kind of like the sermon I was giving yesterday, this thing's rotten. This is a purple purple martin gourd with a snake in it. Get that snake out of here. And the snake, his smell's all in there. So the purple martins are going to come back. So the thing's got to come down. We got to kind of restart this thing, right? So in the Bible, the sea, a lot of times, is an image for Gentiles. It's also an image for death, but it's an image for Gentiles. So possibly what's happening here is that this mountain, which is the temple, and what's the temple? It's where people meet with God. If that temple goes into the sea, in effect what's happening is the place where people meet with God is going to go out to all those Gentiles out there in the nations. What happens with Jesus? That's exactly what's happening, right? Everyone can meet with God now through Jesus. And so that's part of what's going on. And Jesus says, pray for the mountain to be thrown into the sea. So that's my attempt there. We talked a little bit. The sea comes up a lot more in the New Testament than Old Testament, right? Jesus calls fishermen, not shepherds, right? In the Old Testament, all the good people, the prophets, these amazing people are almost always shepherds. New Testament, fishermen. Paul, he's on a ship in Acts, right? Jesus is teaching on boats. He's at the Sea of Galilee. They're eating fish all the time in the New Testament. There's no one eating fish in the Old Testament. You can't find it once. So Gentiles, going to Gentiles. Second trumpet. Then a third of the sea became blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died. A third of the ships. So, third sea blood. Third sea creatures, right? Died. Okay. And then a third of the ships. Okay. All right. The sea turning into blood. Exodus again. Yes, Exodus again, right? Water turning into blood. First trumpet, there's hail and fire mixed with blood coming down from the earth. So if blood's coming down from the earth, of course it's going to start filling into the sea too. Sea starting to fill with blood. In Exodus, what's the major bloodshed before the plagues? It's the infant baby boys. So could it be that in Exodus, when the Nile was filled with blood, in effect what God was doing was saying, here's the blood of all the babies you killed. You're going to be judged for that. Here's that blood. Remember Cain and Abel. Abel's blood on the earth is crying out. Crying out. The blood's crying out for the avenger of blood. We saw that in the fifth seal. The martyrs under the altar crying out, Sovereign Lord, how long? Okay, well, if in Exodus, if the blood of the Nile might represent the baby boys who were killed, then the blood here, what would that represent? It might represent the martyrs under the altar and martyrs like the 144,000. So martyrs under altar and 144,000 and the great multitude. There's all these saints coming in. And their blood's crying out just like Abel's was. A third of sea creatures died. No. Sea creatures died. Well, one way of thinking about it is if the sea represents the Gentiles, which I was just saying, then these are Gentiles. These are Gentiles. They're sea people. If you're in Israel and the Greek-speaking world are all those people on the Mediterranean, they're the sea people. They're living all on the coast of that big sea that we call the Mediterranean. They're those sea people out there. Obviously, there's Gentiles that are not just in the Mediterranean, but Gentiles. Remember the book of Jonah. Jonah's hanging out with a lot of Gentiles. Where is he? He's on the sea. He meets them on the sea, right? And then a third of ships are destroyed. Ships. Okay, so the first seal, a third of the land was destroyed. But we didn't have any sense that Gentiles were destroyed in the first seal. Now the Gentiles, the sea. So now we're getting sea here. The first one was didn't have to do with the sea. The second one, now we're getting sea. All of these are sea. Not the mountains are going to the sea, or this mountain. And then sea, sea, sea. And so the ships, there's two ways that I've seen that we can think about this. I'm sure there's more. But the two ways I've seen is that one is that ships represent Gentile cultures. Gentile cultures. So you got your Greek culture, you got your Roman culture, you got your, I don't know, Sicilian, I don't know, just random islands and different stuff. These different Gentile cultures. One way of thinking about it is that they're kind of like ships. Ships are feminine, cultures are feminine, cities are feminine. They house people, right? So ships are like houses on the water. If the waters are Gentiles, the houses on the water are like kind of could be thought of as cultures. And as Rogers mentioned, the sixth seal from chapter 7, it said a quarter. Stuff was happening to a quarter of the, remember the sword and pestilence, and these happened to a quarter of the earth. And now we're getting thirds. So that it's increasing. And it turns out that if you look at all the entire trumpet section, there's 12 mentions of 1/3. And what's 12 thirds is 4. And 4, like the 4 winds of the earth, the 4 corners, the 4 rivers, it's something about the completeness of earth itself, totality of earth itself. All right, third trumpet. Third trumpet, the third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven. Blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the fountains of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died because of the water, because it was made bitter. All right. We're in the deep end a little bit. It's getting even harder, right? Yes. So if you, Debbie, I'm sorry. I meant to give you his handout. See that one. We won't even get to this one. Okay. So if you look at your handout, what you'll see is that reference to the book of Exodus. What does it say? Exodus 15. Exodus 15. When we did 5 weeks in Exodus for Sunday morning, we didn't get to look at this. But Exodus 15, the Israelites are led out, they're lifted up out of bondage in Egypt. They are wandering in the wilderness. And they come to a, where's this? 15:22, yeah. Okay. And they went in the wilderness and they found no water. Okay, so Exodus 15:22. But they came to Marah. They came to Marah. They could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. And Marah, the word Marah, the name Marah means bitter. It's where we get the name Mary, and Miriam means bitter. So they're going to this, they're really thirsty. They go to this source of water, and it is bitter. And so the people murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And the Lord showed Moses a tree and threw it into the water. And the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he provided them, saying, "If you do diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord your God and do that which is right in your eyes." Okay. So this is kind of the opposite. So for the the Israelites, the water was first bitter, and then God makes it sweet. He throws a tree in. He throws wood in, and it becomes sweet. And God goes on to say, if you do that which is right in the Lord's eyes and give heed to his commandments, keep his statutes, I will put none of the diseases upon you which I put upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. In a sense, what's happening is God's saying, if you do what I command you, I won't make the waters bitter, and I won't give you diseases from the water. If you drink from the bitter water, you will get diseases. And so God takes those bitter waters out, or the bitterness out of the water, sweetens it with the wood that goes in there. But this is the reverse. So maybe, the waters were not bitter before here, rivers and fountains, but now because this star fell to the earth, now it's bitter. The star is called Wormwood. If you look on your sheet, Jeremiah 9:15 and 23:15, some of your Bibles will use the word wormwood there too. So you'll see wormwood show up in Jeremiah there. But when we have this star falling, I'm sure many of us think, that sounds like Lucifer in Isaiah, right? That sounds like Satan, right? So I should have put it on your sheet, but it is Isaiah 14:12, if you want to write it down. Isaiah 14:12, where you have Lucifer, the morning star that falls. Isaiah 14:12, and in Isaiah 14:12, it actually may be a king of Babylon who's falling, because remember, the stars are rulers. Remember, on our flag we have 50 stars, and those stars aren't angels. Those stars for our flag represent states, and other countries have stars and stuff too. And so stars can represent angels, but they can also represent rulers, rulers over the people. And so this star is falling. We also, remember, Jesus says in Luke, I wish I had the reference right here, but in Luke, Jesus says he saw Satan fall from the sky. Does someone have that reference? Well, I'll give that to you at a later point. It might, let's see. Okay. All right, so what is this? I'm going to give you some suggestions, but we're going to wrestle with it together, okay? So, this great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the fountains of water. Fell on the rivers and water. So last seal, we saw that it was on the sea. Where did I put my marker? This happens to me all the time. It's going to be right here. There it is. Okay, we saw the sea before, but now it's not a sea, it's rivers and fountains. In the Bible, sea and rivers and fountains are significantly different, because fountains come out from the earth. And rivers are kind of like that too. So the Garden of Eden, what do we know about Eden? There's a bunch of rivers, aren't there? Flowing out to all of creation. 4 rivers, in fact. We're about like the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 winds. 4 kind of means completeness of the earth. The 4 rivers going out. And just like the sermon yesterday, the temple was always, wherever God dwelt, there was always a tree representing God's presence. And there's always a river. We have that in the very end of the book of Revelation, right? There's the river of life. And there's the tree of life. There's always a river and tree. And yesterday in the sermon I was talking about how the river that was supposed to flow out of the temple in Jerusalem was actually the Tower of Siloam. It was starting to fall apart, which goes on to kind of tell us, hey, this river of life was starting to fail. It wasn't really giving life. It wasn't really sustaining it and nurturing all the people. So, because Israel's supposed to be a blessing to the world. You're blessed to be a blessing, right, for Abraham. Supposed to bless everybody. But that was not happening in Jesus' day. And so these rivers and fountains are a picture of the temple. I do this because you're not surprised, because I'm talking about the temple a lot. But it's a picture of the temple. Jesus is railing against the temple authorities all the time. Remember, he's held captive by Caiaphas, the high priest. Why are the high priests so scared of him? Because he's challenging that the temple is not delivering. God's not really there anymore. He used to be, but not anymore. It's not doing its job. I'm going to give you a couple references to fountains in the Bible. I don't have it in your handout, but if you want to write these down. The entire chapter of Ezekiel 47. The end of the book of Ezekiel tells us about the future temple. So once we get to the end of the book of Revelation, you're going to see a lot of Ezekiel references, allusions. So Ezekiel chapter 47 is all about the river flowing out of the temple. And then Psalm 46:4. Remember, that's the that be still and know that I'm God. The holy habitation and the river that makes glad the city of God. And then Psalm 87:7. That's all my fountains are in you. Remember that? Talking about all the nations are going to look at Jerusalem and say, all our fountains are in you. Our sustenance, all the rivers of life, it all flows from Jerusalem. And that's what Psalm 87:7 is saying. Psalm 1, remember, there's the tree that has the streams flowing around that tree to nourish that tree. And then there's the righteous man. There's the entire Psalm 1. You can look at that. And then Genesis 7:11 talks about these springs coming up from the earth. And then Revelation 14:7 and 22:1. Okay. All right, so Wormwood. What is this Wormwood? Well, it's got to be probably Satan himself or one of the fallen angels, right? This is a fallen angel. We're getting into the deep spiritual realm of things going on. But Stars can also mean rulers. So Wormwood certainly could be Satan or one of his fallen angels. But if it was a human, and I don't think it has, maybe it's not necessarily one or the other, because we know demons are possessing people, right? Jesus is casting demons out, and so who is a ruler who's polluting the waters of the temple at this time? Well, Herod could be one, or the high priest. So I'm just giving you a number of people it could be, but I do think it probably is either Satan or a fallen angel. But behind the scenes, the angel or Satan or fallen angels or Satan are influencing Herod and the high priest, and they're kind of polluting them. And so bitter water is coming out of the temple. What would that look like? That would look like false teaching. That would look like bribes and collusion and obviously persecuting Jesus and Christians too. Persecuting Christians. Right? So when you go to worship, you're supposed to be fed. You're fed food, and in a sense, you're kind of given drink. And so the temple's supposed to be feeding these fountains, rivers. They're supposed to be giving a river of life, water of life. But they're not. So this is an anti-river of life. It's the opposite of it. Okay, we're almost fourth trumpet, and then the fifth one. Remember the seven seals? The first four were shorter. The fifth one's just a little so the first four seals, 2 verses each. Then fifth seal, 3 verses. Then sixth seal, a lot longer. And 7 really long. The trumpets are just like that too. They're going to get longer. And now we're at the fourth one. Maybe we have just a minute or two. We'll just hit the fourth one for a second here. Fourth trumpet. And a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light was darkened. A third of the day was kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. Okay, so third of sun, is it third of sun darkened, and then third of moon and stars, is that right? Is that right? Okay. And then third of night and day. Okay. All right. We'll get back to this next time, but the fourth one, we've already seen this in the sixth seal. Remember the sun was darkened and the moon turned to blood. Remember that? And in Matthew 24, Jesus talks like this too. Remember, the stars are going to fall, the sun's going to be darkened, and Jesus talks like that in Matthew 24 as well. And in John's Gospel, Jesus talks a lot about. He'll say things like. When he's going to heal Lazarus, bring him up from the dead, he says, we can walk while it's day, but soon it'll be night. So wherever Jesus is and what he's doing is day. Jesus is the new day. But before he makes all things new, there's going to be kind of this last night. You know, remember on the cross, it turned dark for a little bit, right? So cross, it was dark. And that's a little foretaste of what's happening here. Cross, it was dark. That's what Jesus is talking about is going to happen. So we're going to just stop right there for now. Questions, comments, thoughts. This is really heavy stuff. These are rulers, right? In Genesis 1, God put the greater light and the lesser light and the stars to rule the day, govern the day. It's not just symbolic. They represent like angels ruling over creation. If these are going to be darkened, what does that mean? Something new is going to start ruling. Who is that? That's Jesus and all the Jesus people. Who's that? That's us. Remember how in chapter 7 with the multitude, 144,000, who started leading worship for the first time in history? Us, humans, the saints. They started ruling. But in order for us to start ruling, in order for us to start leading worship, the old way has to stop. And that's what's starting to happen here. The old rulers have to stop in order for the change to happen. One thing I want to flag is it's easy for me as a modern reader to look at this and say, Jesus, are you saying that stars are actually going to go out, or the day is actually going to be a third less, so a day is like 20 hours instead of 20 or something? But it doesn't, you don't have to apply it necessarily that directly. In one sense, yes, the cross, it was darkened for a couple hours. There really was a darkening, but it also means that the ordering of things is going to change too, right? So when the old heavens and the old earth are going to be done away with, it doesn't mean that the physical earth is gone, right? But it means the ordering of things has changed totally. The way that things are related to God and to Jesus have changed. And so that's what's going on. We're wrestling with how that is the case and what that means here. But we know that at least things are not staying the same. We can at least say that, right? Things are changing. And Jesus is in control. Y'all want anything you'd like to share before we close out? Like I said, on the emails you'll see the videos we just watched will be on there. The lectures, so this lecture right now, or this Bible study right now, I will put online. So if you've missed any of them, they're going to be on there. Except I only have 5 now. So if